Hello, I am Dr. Yang Wol-eun of Hub's Institute for Information and Archival Science. We are going to have the evening break at 6:50. So we have a number of presentations as well as interview and PowerPoint slideshow as well. And we also have a discussion session. So I'd like to ask all of you to please talk within the time limit. We're going to hear from Professor and Dr. Shin Dong-sam, who will be interviewed by the movie director Moon Jung-hyun.
Hello, everyone. As introduced, I am Moon Jung-hyun. I mostly produce and direct documentary films. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk with Dr. Dong-sam Shin. You are originally from North Korea, and you went through the Japanese colonial rule, the Korean War, and the division of the war, the Korean Peninsula, and then you immigrated to Germany, and then you also went over from East Germany to West Germany, so you have had many different experiences. So in that sense, as someone who was at the border of division, I believe that your life indeed represents the modern history. There's so many things that I want to ask you, but due to the time limit, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. So can you say a few words of greetings to the participants? Can you hear me?
끊기고 있는 것 같은데요.
I believe that there's some technical problem.
예, 이제 들리십니까, 선생님?
Once again, can you hear me? Oh, yes, yes. I'm very happy to meet you. Yes, please go ahead. You want to say hello to the participants? Can you say something? Yes. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you. There are so many participants here. I gave a short introduction of Dr. Shim to the participants. So would you say hello? I don't know what you're asking. I'm sorry. In 2019, I had a chance to interview you. Yes, with my wife as well. Yes, I remember. At that time in 2019,
네. 들리십니까, 선생님?
Can you hear me? I think we have some connection problem. Why don't we try again? Dr. Shin?
네. 혹시 선생님 소리가 들리시면 네.
If you can hear me, maybe you can mute and then unmute again.
다른 분들도 안 들리시는 거죠?
I believe we cannot. Oh, so can you hear me? Yes, yes. I can finally hear you. So you can hear me, right? I guess maybe because we're so
지금은 들리십니까, 선생님?
Can you hear me?
선생님 목소리가 지금 안 들려서.
We cannot hear Mr. Shin.
네. 거리가 멀어서.
Maybe because we're distanced. We're far away from each other.
제 목소리 들리세요?
Can you hear me?
조금만 기다렸다가 예.
We will give him a few minutes to see if it's going to work.
혹시 소리가 들리시면 제 생각에는 이게 접속이 됐다가 지금 끊겼다.
I believe that the connection is unstable.
Und dann können Sie vielleicht diesen Handy einmal Ihren Pass, dann,
네, 선생님 지금 제 목소리 들리십니까?
Can you hear me, Ms. Dr. Shin?
네, 소리가 지금 네, 계속
The
예.
audio is not clear. And there's quite a lot of noise.
Ja, jetzt können wir noch mal probieren.
네.
그 지금 인터뷰가 원활하게 진행이 안 되는 것 같으니까 선생님 포스터에 있는 프로필 그 문 감독님께서 이렇게 잠깐 소개를 해주시고
Director Moon, why don't you give a short introduction on Dr. Shin?
네네, 이제 들리는 것 같아요.
Oh, I think it's working now.
선생님 제 목소리 들리십니까?
So you can hear me, right?
네.
Yeah, Dr. Moon.
제가 2019년도에
So I had a chance to interview Dr. Shin in 2019, and what was the most impressive
좋았던 순간
was when I asked him when was the best moment and the worst moment in his life.
그 가장 좋았던 선택 혹은 순간에 대해서
In the interview, you talked about the best moment in your life, which was when you met your wife, and the most regrettable moment in your life.
예. 소리가 예.
I cannot hear Director Moon very clearly, so it is hard for me to understand. Well, we can hear you fine.
어쨌든 가장 후회하는
Anyhow, back to what I was talking about, you said that the most regrettable moment in your life
제대로 이루어지지
was that you were not really able to make contribution to scientific exchanges,
너무 큰 시절에 어떤 남과 북의 만남이라고도 할 수 있어요.
and you met your wife at the time of difficulties, and I'd like to hear more about how you came to meet your wife.
과학기술 협력이라는 것이
And when it comes to scientific cooperation and exchanges between the two Koreas, what do you think it can do in promoting the inter-Korean relations?
안 들리시는군요. 네.
I think Dr. Shin is not able to hear us.
예, 이슬아 선생님 저기 선생님하고 좀 얘기 나눠주시면 감사하겠고요. 네.
Ms. Isara, she's talking with Dr. Shin, and for the audience, for the sake of the audience, I'd like to briefly narrate his story. He was born in the 1930s, And in North Korea, he studied architecture, and then he went to Germany for architectural studies, and he served as an interpreter while he was in East Germany. And then he went to West Germany and then met a nurse from Korea there, and then he studied an architecture study and became a very well-known and established architect. And in 2001 and 2009, he went to North Korea to be reunited with the separate families of his own. And then at the age of 88, he finally got a PhD in architecture. And currently he lives in Germany, in the city of Leipzig. So that was a very brief story of Dr. Shin's life. So can you say a few words?
제 생각에 괜찮으시다면 그 이스라 선생님이
If
이렇게
it is okay, then maybe Sora Lee can be in between us to relay his message.
네, 소리가 네.
네, 선생님 지금 우선 인사부터 한번 해주시겠어요?
So, Dr. Shin, can you say hello?
이스라 선생님 전달이 잘 안 돼서
Miss Isra, we cannot really understand. So why don't you relay his message on his behalf?
네, 한 번만 더 말씀해 주시겠어요?
Can you say it one more time?
혹시 이스라 선생님께서 이렇게 들으시고 선생님이 이스라
Miss Sila Lee, you may hear Dr. Shin's remarks and deliver them. Unfortunately, the phone connection is also not stable, so please give me a second.
저기 핸드폰을 조금만 가까이 대주시겠어요?
지금 이스라 선생님
Miss Silla, we have some technical problems with this interview, so due to the time constraint, we would have to wrap up the interview portion now, and if we have time later on, then we can resume the interview. And we have Lee Byung-eun, and Lee Byung-eun, would you like to say hello to Dr. Shin? Because they are acquaintances. Hello, Dr. Shin. In 2012, and actually even before that, I would say autobiography. When there was this publication, I was involved in his work. And then I got to be involved in the publication of Shin Dong-sam collection, the photo essay book, and I provided some support in this process. So I would say for more than 10 years, I've been in contact with Dr. Shin, and he's almost like my father. And he is of similar age with my own father as well. So he's like a father figure to me. And his experiences would be a very valuable part of the documentation and archiving for the Korean history. Director Moon Jung-yeon made a 2-hour documentary about Dr. Shin Dong-sam, but I really hope that there will be more work in an effort to document his life story. He's getting old, and due to the COVID-19 situation, he was not able to visit Korea. And many of those who are studying architecture in Korea have been inspired by his experience in restoring many traditional sites in an architectural manner. So I would say that his experience and his expertise is very valuable. And I hope that this conference will be an opportunity to begin our work in recording and documenting his experiences. Thank you. I would like to say a few words, and then we can move on to the next part of the program. The topic of this conference is global peace and coexistence. And we are discussing the division of Germany and the reunification, as well as the division on the Korean Peninsula, in order to discuss global peace and coexistence. And I would say that Dr. Shin's life story is very significant because he went through so many of these historical experiences, especially he's from North Korea, but then he went to East Germany and then West Germany and so on. So his stories would be a good reminder for us to reflect on the past events. I hope that we will have more opportunities in the future to better document and record his stories and his experiences, and so that we can learn lessons from what he has to share with us. And unfortunately, we were not able to have an interview with him, but if we resolve the connection issues later on, maybe we can invite him once again later during the conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Because of technical difficulties, we weren't able to have a smooth interview. I apologize for that. Thank you, Dr. Shin and Director Moon, for your contribution. The next, we're going to hear from Dr. Michael Fuhr, the Director of Center for World Music, University of Hildesheim. He's going to show a PowerPoint slideshow on Hallyu in Europe and music across DMZ in Korea.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me and see the PowerPoint presentation? So if you can give me a sign, it would be nice. Thank you for this invitation to Professor No. I will just share a few impressions on the role of music within the context of reconciliation and peace building, yeah, we'll show you some examples on Hallyu in Europe and music across the DMZ. As we all know, there's a global flow of Hallyu, which is the South Korean popular cultural products around the world for the past 2 decades, and especially K-pop in the recent years, which also became popular within the youth cultural spheres in Europe. And Hallyu and K-pop, which is TV dramas, but also music and movies, met a quite growing fan base and consumer base in Europe, and spawned so-called fan clubs and fan groups, which were quite active. And what we see here is that these kinds of popular culture and music is a quite significant means to cross boundaries. Obviously, we see the crossing of national boundaries. But when we look into the demographics of these people engaged in these popular cultural scenes, then we also see that it's outside of Korea, it's very diverse. It's very ethnically diverse. It's crossing national, ethnic, and religious boundaries as well, and gender boundaries as well. Here's an example of an Hallyu fan club from Düsseldorf 10 years ago, which is quite participatory. So what K-pop fandom is standing for, it's standing for kind of diversity within German or European societies, but also in other parts of the world. It's very participative and inclusive. So this seems to mirror a kind of new trend in the global popular cultural flows, which is still ongoing, and Hallyu, which translates into the Korean wave, as you might know, is coming and going, and it's still present, and it's still growing due to the success of pop stars like Psy. Gangnam Style was a huge hit in 2012, but BTS is also kind of a global icon in this field, and is spawning a kind of different but very unique cultural expression in Germany at these times. So we see here groups which are performing, which are rehearsing, and which are also performing in the public spaces. But I will jump now to the role of music when it comes to crossing the border in Korea, and what is what is well known is the use of music as a weapon, music as a psychological warfare, reaching back to the story of the trumpets of the Battle of Jericho in the Old Testament, where we saw that the Israelites marched around the city walls once a day for 6 days, and 7 times on 7th day, then they blew the trumpets. So the idea of using music and sound as a weapon is kind of materialized at the DMZ as well, with a loudspeaker propaganda broadcast, which started in the 1960s. And we see here the bad side, the dark side of sound and music on the battlefield ground. The South Korean military claim the broadcast can be heard as much as 10 kilometers across the border in the day and 24 kilometers across the night. The broadcast stopped 11 years between 2004 and 2015, and then South Korea resumed them after soldiers were injured by border landmines. The broadcasts were later halted again in 2015, restarted in 2016 in response to the North testing a hydrogen bomb, and finally were dismantled after the historic Inter-Korean Summit in 2018, which received a high media coverage internationally. But I want to look more into the positive effects of how can music crossed or is still crossing the DMZ, and how music is used as a means for creating peace and reconciliation, coexistence, and unification. And there's also a history, and with multiple relationships between different musical and cultural actors, which are based on a shared cultural heritage of Korean music and culture. But what we can see is that there's already a long relationship on how music is used as a diplomatic tool. So musical diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, when it comes to cultural exchange. And one of the first encounters happened in 1985 with the first Inter-Korean exchange event, where for the first time in 40 years of the division, an art performance group together with a group of separated families visited Seoul and Pyongyang at the same time. So this was organized by the Red Crosses in southern North Korea. The first event where more than 50 singers, including Kim Jong-gu, Nahuna, which we see on the right-hand side, which is quite famous singer, popular music singer, trot singer. They performed at the Pyongyang Grand Theater and performing a quite diverse program with contemporary dance, folk songs, and music, which was perceived as a common cultural ground. And this kind of event spawned a series of more events to come in the next years. And another remarkable one was performed in 1919, the Concert for Unification, which took place in Pyongyang and in Imjingaak, for example, but also in Seoul, Imjingaak at the DMZ, and brought together by 2 groups conducted by Lee Sang-young, the great composer, and Wang Byung-hee, the kayagum player, which themselves have a quite personal and tragic historical relationships with the northern part of Korea, and with on different levels when it comes to musical encounters. And they teamed together, they performed in public concerts with the Pyongyang Folk Music Group, for example, at the end of the year in 1990. And another one was 1999, where for the first time pop music was at the center and broadcasted by SBS and NBC, so 2 South Korean national broadcasters, who then broadened the program and more professionalized the technical equipment and so on. So it's clear that it's kind of a long-term relationship which was quite developed at this time. And now it comes more to what used to be named as K-pop, the idol singers, the arrival of idol singers, also in Pyongyang, with starting in 2003 with the first generation of K-pop singers. but also rock singers, the Yundo Hyun band, which also where band members have family members in the north, for example. And so these kind of key events are then also reaching to the future. And I now make a big step to 2018, to the Winter Olympics, which was quite reached wide visibility in the international media, because the North and South Korean sports teams united and was highly celebrated, but also was accompanied by an extensive cultural program which was surrounded by these sports events, and to perform symbolic gestures stressing peace and reconciliation. And of course, these cultural programs, these cultural diplomacy programs, which were going on at these times, especially in the springtime of 2018, were also conducted in preparation of the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit, where, as we all know, President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un shook hands at the truce village of Panmunjom inside the DMZ in April 27. So both presidents pledged to work for complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and agreed on a common goal of the nuclear-free peninsula. And what we see on the right-hand side is the cultural delegates from North and South Korea, and most prominent lady is the Hyun Song-wol, who's a politician, a military officer, but first of all, the musician. So the leader of the Samjiyeon Orchestra and the Moranbong Band. So she was more or less the face of this cultural face of this Inter-Korean Summit, who also prepared these dialogue and discussions and the programs, and also the performances, which were then to come in the months of March and April in 2018. And we see here on the left-hand side, the Moranbong Band, the North Korean counterpart of what is called K-pop in the South, handpicked by the Kim Jong-un, the leader, and the Samjiyeon Orchestra, which is also the representative musical group of North Korea. So there were a lot of exchange programs and common concerts, which then also continued with a bunch of South Korean pop artists who were invited to Pyongyang to do concerts in March and April, with superstars like Cho Young-pil and but also the current K-pop idol stars of the time. I want to quickly switch to another more maybe indie, from the indie music scene there, which is regularly held since 2018, is the so-called DMZ Peace Train Music Festival, held in Choron-gu in Gangwon-do in South Korea, which also is hosted by the Seoul City government and the Choron-gu government and Gangwon-do province regional government. So this is kind of very international, and this is also organized by the UK Glastonbury Festival organizer, where is of course a private interest, but very highly commercialized, but also mediatized to bring to give international attention to the DMZ and the border and the conflict, historical conflict in Korea. So finally, I want to quickly come back to what music has to do with conflict transformation. So when we think about how conflicts can be resolved, then of course we have to look at the role of social conflicts, of the value of ethnical and value-based dimensions, of the whole mindset, and culture is quite paramount to this idea of transforming conflicts. It's not only the politicians, but also the cultural players. And one of the definitions of cultural transformation or peace is absence of violence, but also, as Johan Galtung, the peace conflict studies scholar, said, the capacity of transforming conflict with empathy, creativity, and non-violence. And especially when it comes to creativity, then of course musicians and people engaged with cultural expression are very well equipped and have the broad and long expertise to engage in these contexts as well. And now, because myself, I have a background in ethnomusicology, which today is also has a strong component in applied ethnomusicology, very similar to other fields like public history. It's a kind of public outreach approach in ethnomusicology, where scholars not only do their scholarly work, but they also engage as civic people in various contexts and having social responsibility to make their knowledge bring to use to solve concrete problems. And finally, my last sheet is on the peace building concept. How can music and music scholarship can be used to help in peace building? And then I hope that we have the opportunity later to really listen to Dr. Shin Dong Sam, because it's from the field of oral history and anthropological perspective. We also see here Jonathan Stock's concept of how we can deal with memory, music making, and engaging in conflict-ridden situations. And he's suggesting 4 points: naming, witnessing, intervention, survival. It's a quite subjective approach, but it helps to really listen to people, to help them memorize and to document their memories in a dialogic model of intervention, and to facilitate our own roles within performative outcomes, not only not only written outcomes, but also performances, musical, cultural performances, and to make use of these performances and these possibilities to let people come, as he said, coming to terms with their own suffering and with lingering feelings of injustice, hurt, anxiety, or guilt. So listening, music scholars, music people are well equipped in listening to people who have to say something on their own personal history, but also to give the broader picture on the conflicts. So that's everything. And I want to close with a sentence of Keith Howard, a music scholar on Korean studies, who closes his article on the DMZ music. I quote, "Koreans, North and South, musicians and others remain more closely connected than the DMZ might tempt us to believe." And there's a lot of things that we can learn from these encounters across the borders. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. We are running a little late, but it was really interesting. So the presentation was so good, so I couldn't end him in the middle. So I think it was very impressive that we were able to exchange with one another through music. But I think Dr. Shin has participated on the chatting slide. And with that, we'd like to conclude the interview. Next, we're going to hear from the director of Korea DMZ Peace Life Valley, Hwang Ho-seop. He's going to talk about Open the Door to Peace with the Key of Life, 10 years of activities and tasks of Korea DMZ Peace Life Valley. I am the Secretary General of Korea DMZ Peace Life Valley, Hwang Ho-seop. Our chairman has delivered a word of remarks in the opening session. So I am really not that, I can't really meet him all that well these days. He is also chairman of the Semaul Movement Association, and he's really busy there. So it was very difficult for me to meet him these days. So I'm very happy to see him on the screen today. Our organization has been established in 2009. And what I want to talk to you about is what we have done in the past 10 years and what challenges we still have. And I want to also make some evaluations on what we have done and also look at the future plans that we have. The title of my presentation is Opening the Gate of Peace with the Key of Life. If you think of this in a different way, you can think that only with the key of life can you open the gate of peace. You can't open the gate of peace with the key of violence, key of war, or something other than that. So only with the key of life should we open the gate of peace. So key of life is the only one that can open the gate of peace. That is the only key that can actually open the gate of peace. And I think that slogan is very meaningful. And I wanted to share with you that slogan as the title of my presentation. This is where the Korea DMZ Peace Life Valley is located. This red dot area is where we are located, and in the line in the middle is the 38 demarcation line. And in the past, in 1950, the demarcation line was a little different from the demarcation line we have right now. So before the Korean War erupted, our Peace Valley was the northern part of Korea, but now it is on the southern part. We are at Injegun Sohwameon, and we at Daeam Mountain, Yongnam Swamp. We are designated as Korea's first Ramsar wetland. And while we were doing the ecological investigation of DMZ, we found this area, Gyeongbong, and also Gajeonri wetland. In the past, it used to be a place where people lived, where there were farmlands, but because it is now civilian controlled, it has changed into a wetland. And it is a very big area of land which has been recovered naturally. Gyeongbong or Gyeongbong Peak, if you look at DMZ, there's the Baekdu-daegan. This is where DMZ and Baekdu-daegan crosses path. That is Gyeongbong Peak, and it is one of the representative eco-zone of the Korean Peninsula. DMZ in the area actually has a lot of the vegetation that was threatened, but thanks to the protection of DMZ, it is very well preserved. Here you can see where we are located. We are 10 kilometers from the demarcation line, and Gajeonri wetland is where a lot of landmines are located. So we're planning to create that into a landmine eco park so that it could be used for research and training. We're also trying to come up with a life research valley. DMZ is an area where there is a lot of vegetation that calls it home. Not only vegetation we can see in North Korea, but also in South Korea is located in this area. So I think, and our fourth plan is to come up with a DMZ, Peace Life Valley Education Village near Naeumgang region. This is the introduction of the Korea DMZ Peace Life Valley. You can see that there is the accommodation, the museums, centers, and various parks. We don't have a lot of time right now, so I don't think I have a lot of leisure to look at each and every one of them. You can see that the roofs are all green, and also there's natural energy that we use. We use the solar voltaic energy, and we also use wind energy, and also lighting is done in an eco-friendly way. We use natural lighting as much as possible. This is the inaugural declaration of Korea DMZ Peace Life Valley. I think our chairman has already mentioned this. Division is the root of all kinds of pain and sorrow. And it talks about many of the things that we have under our umbrella. So what we want to do is we want to improve the quality of life through the DMZ Peace Life Valley. We want to maintain DMZ and also try to protect the civilian-controlled area. We want to maintain sustainable development, and there's ecological values, cultural values, and also historical values that DMZ holds. And we want to promote that a lot, not just to Korea, but also to the two Koreas and also to the world. And we want to make DMZ, Peace Life Valley, a start where we can bring global peace. Our basic project is DMZ Peace, Life Unification, and Health Education Movement. Education is a very important aspect of our project. We call it the Life Society, the construction of Life Society. We want to make this area into a sustainable area. We are making everything into organic agriculture, and we are trying to minimize waste, establish a foundation for material circulation, save energy, self-reliance, and improve the level of knowledge and culture. And we're doing this movement with the residents of the DMZ Peace Life Valley. We will continue that in the future as well. Of our movements, we have education movement, local field movement, and international cooperation movement. Education, we deal with ecosystem, history, culture, peace, and unification. And in local, we work with the residents to establish sustainable development and to come up with a good model for a sustainable DMZ area. And these are the method and stance we have for our movements and projects. We don't want to make our organization into a big organization. We want our organization to be small and agile. And we want our projects to be resident-centered. And we also want to work in cooperation with neighboring organizations rather than working alone. And we want to return the benefits we get from this movement back to the people and nature. I said education was an important project. We opened in 2009, September, and since then, in 2019, up until 2019, we did a lot of training, but in 2020, we couldn't because of COVID-19. If you look up until 2019, on average, annually, we had 173 training courses and 5,841 people participated. And we also provided education to the residents on the ecology as well as the DMZ, sustainable development, and peace on the Korean Peninsula. We also have teachers training. And we also have the certificate of Ramsar wetland training provided to the residents. And also, we provide training to the residents so that they can be DMZ guides at the end of the day. And we also train them on wetland information so that they can be wetland guides in the future. We have a lot of students coming to our valley. So what we do is we try to provide good training to the students. And to do that, we need teachers to be trained, and we provide that type of training under the DMZ Peace Life Valley. We have been doing the Peace Eco training to Gangwon teachers in 2017, 18, 2020. And we also have training for the public officials. And we also provide training to foreigners as well. For 3 to 4 days, we would have these trainees participate in our valley so that they can get suitable training and education. You can see that there's a lot of students coming to our valley, and according to their needs, we provide training for DMZ, ecology, peace and reunification, climate crisis, and so forth. If you look at the lectures we provide, we also provide tours to the Life Valley. So for lecture part, you can see that we have the DMZ Environmental Ecology Field lecture. We try to teach them about resource deprivation, industrial structure, mass production, consumption, abolition, and so forth. And we also try to teach people about the necessity of a new civilization. Also, we try to teach them about the general status and value of the DMZ ecosystem, and also the road to peace, life, and unification. We provide those type of education as well. And as well, we provide the past, present, and future of the DMZ lectures to the people who come to our valley. And for the visit tour, I said that Yongnup has been designated as the first Ramsar wetland of Korea. And Inbukcheon stream ecosystem is also a part of the tour that we provide. And for experience education, we provide understanding for native seeds and organic agricultural education. And also we provide in education on water shortage, marine waste, plastic pollution, and so forth. This is Daeamsan Yongnup, the high moor, where you can see people doing the ecological tour. And this is the Gajeonri wetland. It is about 300,000 pyong area, and it has been naturally recovered. Here we're thinking about having a landmine eco park. Right now there used to be a military unit, but it has moved to another area. So we are thinking of using this location to make a new monument, such as a museum or so forth. This is Inbuk stream. You can see the water falling from the stream. And this, starting from this year, we're going to have people tour alongside the barbed wire. And here you can see that there is a small gate. The Ministry of Environment took a documentary film of indigenous Korean bear. Here you can see the Kumgangsan mountain and 1052 hill. You can see, well, if you come to our valley, you will be able to hear the story of the 1052 hill. This is the northern limit line. Here you can see that there's the DMZ inner Nam River flowing. This is what you can see within our valley. When we had the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit, the two leaders of the two Koreas decided to make DMZ a truly demilitarized zone. And this was what we have used from the dismantled barbed wires. The artist created this new artwork to symbolize the dismantling of the military remnants. And these are the participants who have come to the Direct Democracy Forum. This is the Asia Pacific Center of Education for the International Understanding under the auspices of UNESCO. And this is one of the experiential training. You use colored magnets to leave peaceful messages. And also, in order to understand the climate crisis, they were able to cook pizza with the natural energy generated. And there's also understanding of the native seeds and organic agricultural education. This is when the students went to visit the DMZ museum. These are some of the efforts we put in to ensure proper education. We try to have a good relationship with the trainees. And one very important thing of us is food. We think that everything boils down to a bowl of rice. So we try to use locally produced ingredients, and we try to make one vegetarian meal per day. Now, this is the achievements that we have made. We did a lot of research survey, and we believe that these researches are important in order to improve our projects that we do with the residents. And also, we are doing various considerations to do with the local community. Here you can see that this is the 60th anniversary of the Korean War for Harmony and Peace Memorial Day event. This was actually the first of its kind in Incheon, and it was donated by the residents. Here you can see that there's a DMZ Peace and Life Convention being held, and these students who were elementary school students then now are university students. This is a tank that was used during the Korean War, and we colored it to symbolize peace and unification. And this is the ceremony that we did to bring DMZ peace, life, and unification. We have done it from 2013, but we weren't able to do it last year because of COVID-19. And this is the Korea DMZ Peace Life Valley debate to celebrate the 10th anniversary. And this is the citizens project to protect the environment and the life on Imbuk stream. And students are not that interested in DMZ that much these days. So what we try to do is we try to promote the participation of these students as much as I can. Now, looking back on the 10 years of our history, peace is seriously damaged and attacked. And life is going through a comprehensive crisis that youth refuse to attend school and worry about the extinction of species. Unification is too far from reality as we are at a situation to worry about internal integration. We're running out of time, so could you please wrap up? Just give me 2 to 3 more minutes. So please refer to my slides. So what's going to happen 10 years from now? We're going to, based on the projects that we have been doing, we will try to improve what we're doing and add on more values. We're trying to come up with the Inje Seohwa DMZ Peace Life Zone, and we're trying to improve the problem of inequality. And we want to create most active response to the climate crisis that occurs, and also work as a center for education for DMZ Peace Life Valley. This is the plan that we have for the future. We have the future area, core area, and background area allotted. And the future area will only be pursued when the inter-Korean relations improves. So what do we want to do this year? We want to first build the landmine peace park, and we're also going to build the Pyeonghwa village, an active village, and we have signed an MOU with an important organization, and then because of the time constraint, I'm not able to go over each and one of them. Anyway, that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would love to visit the education village. So thank you, Mr. Huang, for your presentation. Moving on, I'm going to invite Director Kim Seung-ho of the DMZ Ecology Research Institute. He's going to be discussing the documentation of ecological conditions of the DMZ and the Community Archive for Peace and Coexistence. Please go ahead.
네, 안녕하세요. DMZ 생태연구소 김성호입니다.
Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kim Seung-ho from the DMZ Ecology Research Institute. I would love to go on for 2 hours, but I understand that there is a time constraint, so I will try to go over my slides rather quickly. In 2004, the institute was established. It is a civil research institute. In the DMZ, we have many ecological resources. I'm going to discuss how we can utilize these resources for peace. Here, this is a photo taken right before the DMZ. If you go, let's say, 1 kilometer, you can find Panmunjom, and over there, you can find the Kaesong Industrial Park in North Korea, and you can find these wild birds. Together with the Berlin Wall Foundation, we're holding this conference. So I remember that I visited Germany, and I was wondering about this place in Germany that I visited some decades ago. And I visited some ecological villages and eco-friendly projects in Germany. And I believe that was when I began to become more interested in these initiatives that we didn't have in Korea. That was 20 years ago. So after I came back from Germany, I became more involved in conducting research for ecological resources. And 5 years from then, there was a German reporter who contacted me. And so we took a tour around the DMZ. And the DMZ is rather different from the kind of division that they had in Germany. So he said that it will be very valuable to preserve this area. So every week, on a weekly basis, we began to conduct ecological surveys. Like I said, we were established in 2004, and we've been conducting research ever since. The DMZ, as you may know, is the outcome of the Korean War. Right here, this is the Han River estuary, and this is the DMZ area. Then our institute is located right there. It is very close to the DMZ. Our institution is located there, and on a weekly basis, we conduct field survey so that we can utilize them for various research purposes. As you may know, the Korean Peninsula is very complex. Its situations are very complex. Based on inter-Korean agreements, many activities have been conducted, suspension of hostile actions, and so on. So we are doing investigation in the Han River, and we conducted the joint survey, which was quite encouraging, and we were quite hopeful because the Han River estuary and the involving communities were quite hopeful. And for instance, you can see that we had local leaders who were hopeful, but there were 2 major explosions that clearly show the situations on the Korean Peninsula. On the left-hand side, you can see the blow-up of guard posts, and on the right-hand side, you can see that there is a very serious blowing up of the Joint Liaison Office in North Korea. So these 2 explosions really show how complex it is on the Korean Peninsula, because on the left-hand side, the blow-up of the guard posts was encouraging. On the right-hand side, the blow-up of the liaison office was very discouraging. So whenever we enter into the DMZ, we would be monitored, and there was a lot of tension, but still we conduct ecological survey with young people. And here, this is the JSA, or the Joint Security place, Panmunjom. So we conduct ecological surveys in these places on a weekly basis, every single week. And the ecological survey area is very large, and we do survey on wild birds together with the census data. And in the in the summer, we also check the habitats, insects, and in the western part of the DMZ, we have many wetlands. So we conduct survey on the wetlands in order to build up our database. As you may know, in the DMZ area, after the DMZ was formed, people were not allowed. So there's no civilians allowed inside the DMZ. Only for very special occasions with permits you could enter there. But basically there's no human activity, and therefore we have abundant ecological resources. I've been conducting research here for the past 20 years, and I was able to witness the restoration of biological diversity. And there's so many different special species, and I love this area. I been learning the value of the DMZ ecology. So in our history, there have been a lot of significances in terms of ecology, and we have the topological characteristics on the Korean Peninsula. But this is the area of our focus. Here we have the DMZ, or demarcation line, and this is where we're conducting survey. And here we have the zone 250. This zone is specially protected area where we used to have a lot of red-crowned cranes, but not so much anymore. And here, this is the Osan Observatory, where you can see the North Korean side. And over here, from the observatory, you can actually see what North Korean residents are doing over there. And here we have some villages and local communities near the DMZ. These border area communities are involved in restoring biological diversity. And this is where such activities are happening. In other words, this is very close to the North Korean side of Gapyeong County. And this area is actually very narrow. It's only 600 meters. So with the cell phone, you can take pictures of North Korea because it is a very narrow corridor. And you can see a very important red-crowned cranes staying here for the winter. And over there, this is the propaganda village of North Korea. Here we have North Korean guard posts here and there, and this is the Imjin River. And on our side, on South Korea, we have Seongdongri village, and over there is the Panmunjom. In the past, there were some propaganda messages implemented on these mountains, but these propaganda messages were removed. I will get back to this Nogunri village once again, but here we want to utilize this space for peace building and how we can utilize the space to establish peace. And to do so, we're carrying out a project to restore the population of red-crowned cranes. And this is only 600 meters away from North Korea, very close. And I took this picture with a cell phone, and that's how close it is. And this is a habitat for red-crowned cranes so that they could stay here over the winter. And then they would also fly back and forth between the two Koreas. And this is the kind of project that we are carrying out right now. And this is the starting point of the DMZ. As I said before, there is this common area at the estuary of Han River, and then at the starting point of the DMZ, you can see a large number of birds. And this is Munsan wetland. And this bird is very symbolic. It's called Geri. And it has ecological value. And this is the stopover places for many wild birds. We have the red-crowned cranes and Geri and other types of cranes. And even though fishermen are fishing, you can see these cranes feeding themselves. And so for fishing and for culture, for ecology, this wetland is very important. And near the DMZ, you can see very important wild birds staying over. And there are so many wetlands along the DMZ, and they are habitats for many different species. So we care about these areas, and we are doing a weekly monitoring to understand the situations. In addition, we're very interested in irrigation ponds or dunbang. These irrigation ponds were created in order to grow rice. But because of the DMZ characteristics, these wetlands or irrigation ponds are critical for rice farming. And these places, these ponds, were originally designed for farming, but they offer very important ecological value, and there's so many different species living here. So we even do a survey right below these barbed wires and dividing walls. And when we do a survey, we not only use the GPS data, but also we record and document the tracks and traces. So based on this field survey, you can understand the kinds of species that are living here, but they're not just residing on North Korea, on the Korean Peninsula, but these are migratory birds. And we were able to track some of these flyways of migratory birds by using the tracking devices. And you can see that these birds are flying all the way up to Russia and all the way down to Korean Peninsula. And this is where our institute is located. And these cranes and migratory birds are flying back and forth between the two Koreas. And it really shows that even though we're divided because of ideological differences, these birds and wild animals do not recognize such border. And when you look at the data that we've been accumulating for a long time, this is the DMZ area. And you can see that there are many different areas for the red-crowned cranes, but we don't have data from North Korea, unfortunately, because we were not able to enter there. But for peace in Northeast Asia and on the Korean Peninsula, I believe it is necessary to conduct a joint survey, but even the joint survey is not allowed. We do regular monitoring since 2009 to 2020. You can see that there are many endangered species, endangered level 1 and level 2, and this is the statistics. And you can see this, the level of extinction is rising. And in the DMZ and the nearby areas, development has been happening. So we don't have a lot of habitats available for these endangered species other than the DMZ, because the DMZ is still well protected. So I would say that the DMZ is very crucial for these endangered species. These cranes would lay eggs in Russia, and then they would come down to the Korean Peninsula during the winter. And they are listed on the IUCN list as endangered. They would come down to the DMZ area, and if there was no DMZ, then they would have gone extinct. So it really shows the crucial value of the DMZ, and its population is increasing. So, and then white-naped cranes as well, they come all the way down to the DMZ. And because of climate change, their population has been affected. And this bird is an ancestor of wild geese, wild goose. In 2018 and 2019, there was a surge in its population. And you can also see that there was a peak. This was mainly because of climate change. I would say this is a very crucial data in understanding the consequences of climate change. It's not only the Korean Peninsula, but also in Northeast Asia, rice wetlands, rice farming wetlands are crucial. In the past, they were used for farming as well, but these irrigation ponds for rice farming do offer very important ecological value. And in particular, this is where we're conducting survey near the DMZ. In other areas, irrigation is well developed, but in the DMZ area, the irrigation level is low. So they only rely on the traditional method of farming. They will rely on natural precipitation. But ecologically, this is a wonderful place for animals to live. So we published some research papers, and along the DMZ, there are more than 500 irrigation ponds, and we did a complete survey of all these irrigation ponds in order to understand what types of species are living, and they do have more diversity in their diversity than other habitats. And after we published the paper, there was a media report about this area, and there was this article about raising the question of why we had to build a highway near here. It's not only the irrigation ponds for water-based animals, but also there are other animals who are dependent on these species. So we published a paper on this topic. Now, these are some of the selected areas where we built the data, and then we published a paper. And here the red areas represent droughts. So in years where we had severe droughts, how were these animals and plants survive? And according to our analysis, these irrigation ponds are affected by natural precipitation, and they serve as important living grounds for these animals. And in the DMZ, for the purpose of military, there's no deforestation. There's some forestation because of military purposes, but still there are some forests where landmines are buried, and they contribute to biodiversity. So they have a lot of value. And after our paper was published, there was again a media report about the importance of protecting forests in the CCZ. And this was another paper that we published. Here, this is about endangered water birds in the DMZ area and how they're interdependent. In particular, you can see these groups of animals and plants, especially the water birds. And this data helps us build a better policy for the protection of these species. Once again, the red-crowned cranes. This is a representative species of endangered species. So the data on the red-crowned crane can be used as a representative data for all the other endangered species. And once again, protecting this particular species will help protect other endangered species. So this result and findings were quite important. But unfortunately, there was a project of building a highway that connects between the two Koreas, and this would end up destroying the habitat for the red-crowned cranes. So we're talking with the government so that we can do something about protecting them. The government would want to build a highway to connect to North Korea, but this would destroy the ecology there. And after this paper was announced, there was once again some news reports about the problems of building this highway. So the red-crowned crane is very crucial for ecological value, and this is a key representative species that we need to protect. So in the past, there was a very high population of the cranes, and the local residents had to increase their awareness. Because if we can successfully protect them, we can protect other migratory birds. So since 2016, we've been communicating with the local residents, and we were working on designating this area as a Ramsar village. Here, there were some oppositions of the residents because they wanted to develop this area, but we had a lot of hearings and gatherings. So we developed some awareness raising programs for these residents. And we've been communicating with them very closely. So when we were talking with the local residents, we talked about the ecological value. Also, we talked about the historical value of these communities, these villages. So together with Dr. Choi Jung-eun of Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, we conducted research and we learned that there were many diverse historical and cultural characteristics. And these lives, these people's lives were affected by the Korean War and the division. And in their entire life cycle, what kinds of experiences did they have? These would be very important for recording and documentation. And here, for instance, this is a small government administration well that was used during the Japanese colonial rule, and the well is still available. The well is still there, and it really shows what kinds of history these communities have. And in 1950, July 22nd, there was a very important event. After the Korean War began, in this village, there were many landmines buried in this village. And this picture represents what happened back in 1950. And this is where the residents of Nogunri community live. And up there, you see these pictures. There were some Chinese soldiers who stayed there, and there were another time when the UN forces stayed there. So this house is still there, and it is actually resided by some people. And this place is very close to the North Korean border. And during the Korean War, there were a lot of exchanges and going back and forth between the two. And so this village was once occupied by the Chinese army, and then at other times would be occupied by the UN forces. So these villages went through a lot of difficult times during the Korean War and afterwards. I'm sorry, but we're running out of time. Can you wrap up? Yes. So there are many wounds of the Korean War, and these wounds turned into beautiful flowers, as you can see in this picture. So we've been thinking about transforming their painful memories into something good for peace and prosperity. And there are many programs. And here you can see the guard posts of North Korea. And this is near the CCZ. We wanted to encourage community members to be able to explain their own history and culture. So 3 people were now trained and now qualified as interpreters of their culture and their ecology. And then we've been working on developing the brand, local brand for these communities. So once again, this brand is Paju village, where red-crowned cranes come back. And we combined the 4 different colors that represent this crane. And many local produce was developed. And then this professor from Yonsei University joined us in designing and developing this whole area. There was a community participation. And then there was this food product that refugees used to eat during the Korean War. They were developed once again as product, and many beautification projects were carried out. And by utilizing the local community resources, many different programs are running with local resident participation. And here, this is actually the patrol pathway for soldiers. And we now can see that there's this big connection between ecology and peace. Also, this is about residents' awareness raising study. And there was a study team that conducted survey. And this was about nurturing this area as Ramsar wetland. Now, at the National Assembly, there was a seminar on ways to promote inter-Korean Ramsar designation. So there are 2 places for Ramsar wetlands. So this is something that we can try to do together with North Korea. So and also there is a project of designating the DMZ area traditional farming. And then we have many other sources and resources that we can utilize. And finally, in the border area, compared to the other areas, we have more biodiversity and also many abundant biological resources. So we already have several patents that were developed by utilizing these biological resources available in the DMZ. And I would say that this DMZ area is going to continue to promote and contribute to peace on the Korean Peninsula, also to contribute to the human civilization of the entire world. So we're paying a keen attention to what kind of value this area can offer. And to do so, we need to protect this area and protect its ecology. I would like to say a lot more, but due to the time limit, I'd like to wrap up. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Director Kim Sung-woo. I know that you could have made a wonderful presentation that was longer than what you did, but I want to apologize. We're running out of time. We're being delayed a lot, and we wanted to give the panelists each 10 minutes, but because we have to end at the latest 7:10, so I'd like to ask the panelists to please make your discussions short, from 5 to 10 minutes. First, we're going to hear from Director Kim Young-gyu of Cheolwon Institute for History and Culture.
네, 안녕하세요.
Hello. Can you all see my screen? Yes. You have given me 5 minutes, so I need to really make my presentation short. The 2 presenters talked about Inje and Paju and talked about the ecological status as well as their activities in the regions. What I want to talk to you about is I am acting and working in Cheolwon region. So I don't really have a lot to comment on what they have been doing, but I want to talk about some of the activities that I am carrying out in my region. The 2 presenters talked about the DMZ ecology and talked about the status of the ecological situation of DMZ. But I want to talk about the lost history, the lost village, and the lost cases in the DMZ area. For 15 years, I have met 100 elderly and have done interviews, and I have found out a lot of stories and anecdotes of what has occurred in that region. The reason why I have been doing this work is Cheolwon, before the Korean War, was a part of North Korea. But after the Korean War, it was brought into South Korea. So even the residents who are living here went to North Korea. Many of the people, about 70% of the people living in Cheolwon, went to North Korea. And after the war, they came back to Cheolwon, but it became DMZ and civilian-controlled area. So the buildings that they had, the possession that they have, the city that they lived in disappeared, and their records have disappeared. People, of course, have disappeared. I am also from Cheolwon. In order to learn about the modern history of Cheolwon, I found out that it was all disappeared. So I'm trying to recover that. Cheolwon is in the center of the Korean peninsula. So historically, it is a very prosperous area. But during the war, it was invaded a lot by people. Cheolwon, this is a picture that has been taken from a small hill. And here, this is the DMZ area, and you can see the North Korean region. And this is the Baekmagoji area, and there's the plains. And the people who come to Cheoron say that it is amazing that they can see this wide DMZ plain from Cheoron. And they're able to see the division of the two Koreas in one site. You can see that there is the horizon, and it is a very wide area where you can see the area in a panoramic view. This is Cheoron, and many people have mentioned this. The red line is the 38th parallel line. So before the Korean War, this was the North Korean territory. So my parent generations usually were the communist forces, and they would come down to Cheoron and in 3 days occupied the area. But the communist army went up back to North Korea because they were attacked by the UN forces. And then because of these geological characteristics, many residents went to North Korea. It was due to geological reasons or also because of their ideological reasons. That is the current status of Cheoron. I am a historian myself. From 1950s, since the two Koreas were divided, since the liberation in 1945, for the 5 years, it was a communist region. And then there was the 3 years Korean War. And then about for 10 years, it was under the US rule. And for that 10 year of time, we don't have any records left. I wanted to talk a little bit about this, but because of the time constraint, I may have to wrap up. Cheoron, before there was the Korean War, it was part of North Korea, but now it is part of South Korea, and it is the northernmost city of Korea. And you can see that Cheoron has a very tragic history. So the residents in Cheoron would want to have a way to go to North Korea. There can be only one way, which is reunification. So they're hoping for reunification to take place. We can't see your screen. Could you please show up your slides?
되나요?
네, 됐습니다.
Can you see it now? Yes. So if you look at the restored areas, the most unfortunate thing is it was previously a North Korean territory, but now a South Korean territory, and the residents all moved away from the region. But then when they came back, there was a big change in the environment. And a lot of the residents were victimized in the process. And due to the Cold War era, people have been hurt a lot. So under these ideological war and conflict, these people have a lot of angst in their hearts. So this generation has difficulty in trying to restore the hope that they have for reunification. This is the prosperous Cheoron that you can see before the Korean War. Now you can see how Cheoron has changed pre and post-war. So under the Japanese colonial rule in the 30s, during the Korean War, and you can see that the post-South Korean reclamation, after the war, nothing was left. There was about 100,000 people before the Korean War, but now there's about 40,000. So about half of the people have moved out. If we go to the northernmost part of Cheoron, this is the ice storage during the Japanese rule. There is a slogan that is written there, and it still remains there. There's the second financial union, and you can see that there's the bullet remnants. You can see that these are all wounds of the war. I want to show you one picture of an elderly that I did an interview with. If you look at these people, you may think that they are Chinese army, but the people in this picture are the Cheolwon residents. Cheolwon people, during the Korean War, 70% went to North Korea as refugees. But there were people who didn't want to go to North Korea. So what happened is they moved to the mountains. And that was September 1950. And the people who went to the mountain in September, they come back in November and December. But they don't go back to South Korea. But what they did was they waited until the war was over. But then, after the Chinese army occupied this area, the US army occupied the area. And when I did the interview with 150 elderly, what really pained my heart was that when they were living in the mountain, they didn't know when they had to go down. And one day they went to Cheolwon and they found US troops. One day they went there and they found Chinese troops. So they weren't sure what would help them survive in these times. So they had to wait in the mountain for almost a year. And I asked them, why didn't you go to North Korea? And they said, one person said that I didn't want to go to North Korea. And I said, why didn't you go to the South Korea then? And he said, how can I go South Korea? If I do, then I would be considered a spy and enemy. So the people in from Cheolwon had to hide away from the war. And these people were freed when the US troops came, and they were ones who tried to restore the areas after the Korean War. Anyways, Cheolwon, when I did an interview of many of the peoples, I don't think I have a lot of time to talk to you about the interview, but Cheolwon is a very important area in Korean Peninsula. But in the past 100 years, it was part of North Korea. Now it is the northernmost city of South Korea. And it is its geopolitical situation that it is placed in. And I think the only way to solve this would be reunification. And I think that if we're able to document the memories of DMZ, I think Cheolwon would benefit greatly from this symposium. With this, I'd like to conclude my panel discussion. Thank you.
I'm sorry that we were not able to give you enough time, but thank you very much for your discussion and the presentation. Next, let me move on to Mr. Lee Chang-soo, who is the representative of Unique Studios, and he's also a documentary producer. Please go ahead. Hello, I am Lee Chang-soo, head of the Unique Studios, and we are involved in producing international projects. I have more than 30 years of experience. And I believe that I was invited to the symposium because of the documentary that we produced last year titled 3070. So 30 years of German unification and 70 years of Korean division or I'm sorry, but your voice is very low. So can you speak up, speak louder? Yes, I did a lot of study for this documentary, and I studied the Berlin Wall and Germany and also the Korean history. And I was thinking about what to cover in the documentary. And I thought that the dividing processes between Korea and Germany were quite different. And I'm not a scholar, I'm not an expert. So when it comes to these researchers for Korea, DMZ, and the German case, I personally think that the German unification would have happened much faster if there was no Korean War, because the East Germany and West Germany had to build up this Berlin Wall after the 1950s, and I believe that the Korean War was a trigger in this process. So that was included in the documentary because there was a lot of arms race. I also produced documentaries on wild animals and wild species, and I would be one of the few people who've been producing documentaries on the DMZ. And we had Mr. Hwang and Mr. Kim talking about the ecological values of the DMZ. So in this regard, I'd like to make some proposals, suggestions before I wrap up. Actually, when I was filming the DMZ documentary, I got a lot of attention from overseas, and I did some presentations and pitchings. And what I found interesting was that there were so many people around the world who were interested in the DMZ, but they didn't really have proper understanding of the DMZ, because as I was it was almost impossible to produce a nature documentary because you're not allowed to enter there. There are landmines and you may run into a lot of risks and dangers. For the past 20 and 30 years, I've been making the nature documentaries, but they were not about the DMZ, but they were filmed within the CCZ, or the civilian control zone. But it would be very important to produce a documentary inside the DMZ, which is not possible right now. There are a lot of diverse wild natural ecological characteristics, but they were so far mainly limited to the CCZs because we were not allowed to enter into the DMZ. But what I'm concerned about is that there's this need, a dire need, to share correct information and knowledge about the DMZ, because there's a lot of misunderstanding and misperceptions. And I was doing some pitching at the BBC and other broadcasting stations, and they were asking me, how were you going to enter into the DMZ? And I would have to say, no, I cannot go inside the DMZ. So it was quite embarrassing, but there are so many political and complex situations. But about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a very rare type of bear who was found in the DMZ. And I would say that it's been only 2-3 years since we became aware of the special bear. So these days, I'm thinking a lot about what to do. So whenever we talk about creating ecological tour systems, it hurts my heart, because when there's unification, then can we return the CCZ and the DMZ back to the nature? If unification happens, people would want to develop this area, which is quite worrisome. We have the stories of war and peace, and the tension between the war and the peace, the tension between the nature preservation and development. There are many declarations and many texts, but I wonder if there are so many visions and whether these visions can be achieved, because there's so many ideal declarations, but we have to know where we should protect and where we should return back to the nature and where we can develop. We need to discuss this. This year, I am working on a new project to raise awareness about these types of aspects. Mr. Kim said that there are red-crowned cranes who are coming to the DMZ and the surrounding areas. But for the past 2 years, we've been working to make a film about how the Amur tigers and the Asian tigers can come back to the Korean Peninsula. We imagine that these tigers are crossing the Tuman River and come all the way down to the DMZ area. Let's say that they cross the border between the two Koreas, but will we ever allow these animals to live in the wild habitat? I don't think so. So the purpose of this year's project is actually about that. We have Serengeti, we have this wild nature. It's not complete in its ecological pyramid because we do not have the ultimate predator, which is the tiger. And if the tigers ever come back, how can we maintain this ecosystem? So this is the motive behind this year's project. So the title of this project is Serengeti on the Korean Peninsula. I would say that the Serengeti on the Korean Peninsula will be somewhere near the civilian control zone, and to have this kind of ecology, we would have to protect the wetlands. There's Yangide wetland in Cheolwon, and this could be preserved as a special place that could be designated as a national park, where leopards and tigers from Siberia come all the way down to the Korean Peninsula. They could live there. So I like to give this idea to ecological researchers and those who are studying this area. I hope that you will consider this aspect. Of course, I understand the cranes, they fly, so they do not recognize borders, but there are these wild tigers and leopards who would want to come down to the Korean Peninsula in the next 10, 20 years, and would we be able to keep them and allow them to live in their natural habitat? Because the DMZ area, the surrounding area, the CCZ can be a very ideal candidate for that. And we had the miracle on the Han River, and we had many miracles in the past. And so I hope that Korea can become the first country in the world where they succeed in preserving and protecting these natural habitats. And in that sense, I think we have to consider what we can do in terms of ecology and in terms of geography. And I hope that researchers out there will work together. So just like this popular song titled "The Tigers Are Coming Down," likewise, I hope that that will happen. And then we should be ready to yield or give that into the nature. And finally, whether we think about peace or using the DMZ as a symbol of peace and a symbol of Cold War, this is all good, but war and peace, humans and nature, preservation versus development, these may not coexist. Of course, I talk about coexistence, and DMZ is an ideal place where we can discuss coexistence, whether it is ecological coexistence or the historical coexistence. We have to find a solution to coexistence, and DMZ can be that kind of place. So I hope to be able to launch this new project with BBC this year. I'm sorry that my words were not organized, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming within your time limit. Next, we're going to hear from Cho Heng-im, the curator of DMZ Museum.
우선 오늘 토론회를 보면서 이렇게
While I was listening to the panel discussion, it was very meaningful that I was able to hear from people from different walks of society. Let me briefly introduce to you about the exhibition of DMZ Museum. Many people have mentioned this. If you look at the map, our museum is, we can't see your screen. We only can see your folder. We can't see the PowerPoint slides on the screen yet.
네, 이제 보입니다.
Yes, we can see your slide now. Well, we are at the East Coast, the northernmost part of the East Coast. We can't see the present.
슬라이드 쇼 하지 마시고 그냥 이 페이지에서 바로 설명하십시오.
Could you just go ahead with your presentation, because I don't think the slide can be turned. Okay, my apologies. I'm not sure why the slides are not being turned, but let me go ahead with my presentation. Okay, so let me just comment. We talked about the collecting to display the artifacts collection of the Berlin Wall Foundation by Dr. Manfred Wickman. That was very impressive, because in our museum, we tried to come up with an archive and try to make that into a museum. And also, Mikhail Fur talked about the World Music Center and how the propaganda tools are being used. But what was interesting was, when we think about propaganda tools, we only think about it as a negative aspect. But Dr. Mikhail Fur talked about music being a part of that propaganda, which was very interesting. And also, the DMZ Peace Life Valley story was very interesting, as well as the DMZ Ecology Research Institute story, talking about the crane, how the wild birds come as a stopover, was very interesting. And I think that these global and world-class data needs to be recorded and needs to be utilized, and that was all very interesting. At the very end, I really was impressed by the film producer's comment. Siberian tiger, Amur tiger, was something that I had researched on. Siberian tiger lives in Russia and also North Korea. But if they actually comes down to the Korean Peninsula, then that would indeed be a very interesting phenomenon. During the Japanese rule, a lot of the tigers in Korea have disappeared. So it's not just ecological aspect, but also a historical and cultural aspect. If we're able to have these tigers come back down the Korean Peninsula. And I think it would also be very important in looking at the DMZ from a different and multifaceted angle. I'm sorry that I couldn't explain to you about our museum that well. I actually made a great presentation slide, but it's very unfortunate that I can't share the presentation with you. DMZ Museum is about the ecology, nature, history, culture. We have a very big collection, and every year a lot of the institutes come to us for propaganda materials. They would come to us because we have a lot of those archives and records, and we also provide our information and data through an online platform. And we also lend the material that we have. And last year, it was the 70 years anniversary of the Korean War, and we provided a lot of information to related institutes. And these forums are not only limited in ecology, but it's very meaningful that I am meeting so many experts from different walks of the society. Once again, apologies for my presentation. Thank you.
I am sorry that you were not able to share the slides. I'm sure you put a lot of effort in preparing for that. And finally, I'm going to invite Mr. Virant Wagner, a former correspondent for Spiegel, for his comments.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank everybody for their very interesting presentations. I've been to the DMZ quite often, and I always found this a pretty emotionally horrifying experience in a way, and also a place for me usually where I could connect to the Korean experience, being a German coming from a country that also used to be a divided country. But still, even though I've been there quite a lot of times, I learned a lot today. And since this is a panel discussion, I haven't prepared any slides, but I rather have, as I'm a journalist, I rather have some questions which might also maybe serve as comments. Of course, as the previous speaker already mentioned, I also wonder what Korea can learn from Germany's experience after unification, because as was mentioned this morning, after unification, Germany really was in a hurry to do away with the remnants of division of the war, because people, of course, wanted to forget, but also people wanted to make money, and there was this, where all these investors rushing into Berlin, for instance, and trying to build new buildings and so on. So I just wonder, in your concept of the DMZ, like the Peace Valley or all these concepts, whether you also have some ideas for the future, how you might prevent this kind of process happening in Korea, that after unification, people will just do away with all these peace, the remnants of the DMZ, and just say, let's develop this area, and just also, we just want to forget, we just want to look into the future. So I just wonder, since this was not really being mentioned, what this role does, I mean, this problem, how big a role does this play in your concepts? And the other thing I was thinking about when you gave your very fascinating presentation of the Peace Valley. Of course, this is a great idea, turning the painful experiences of people into something beautiful. On the other hand, one could also ask whether you are not in the danger of camouflaging the sufferings of people, or maybe in a way, whether there isn't this danger of harmonizing the whole violence which is lurking in the DMZ, by making this a beautiful place. And I just wonder, if we had more time, it would be very interesting to discuss these questions. And then it was also mentioned that the DMZ is not only a place for Koreans themselves to reflect on division and unification, it's also a place for foreign visitors, where you can teach them about the Korean experience and build up a kind of model for global visitors. And I just wonder what kind of visitors you have in mind, mainly. Are these the Japanese, for instance? Because Japan played a big role, obviously, in Korean division. I mean, you could also say that it was the fault of Japan that Korea is divided today. And there are also, of course, a lot of countries which still benefit from Korean unification and don't have any interest in Korea really being unified. I mean, you can take Japan and China and America, of course, and also Russia. And then also what I've just wanted to mention, since we have one colleague here from Mr. Mishra from India. I also was correspondent in India, and they also had a very brutal border, of course, a very brutal experience of division, because India was once much bigger than today. And now it's divided into Pakistan and India and Bangladesh, and especially the Indian-Pakistan border is very brutal. Or you could also take the example of Gaza Strip, Israel, the occupied territories in Palestine. I just wonder whether there might not also be some connections where the DMZ and also maybe the German border, the German wall era, where you could draw some connections to other borders nowadays, where even nowadays conflicts are going on, and how this might be, so the Korean-German experience might be turned into something useful for other nations as well. And then I have another final question. You showed these slides of blowing up the guard posts and the liaison office in Kaesong. And I just wonder, with all these summits and phases of détente and rapprochement between the North and the South, whether there have ever been any talks about developing the DMZ into something, into kind of peaceful area. I mean, to what extent you might be able to cooperate with the North in the future, maybe. I mean, of course, it was being mentioned that at the last summit, 2018, President Moon and Chairman Kim had decided to turn the DMZ into a really demilitarized zone or something. But I don't know whether this wasn't just beautiful words or to what extent this had a concrete meaning. But anyway, these projects that we have been heard about today, like the Peace Valley, I just wonder how your concept, whether you have any concepts, how you might connect this with the North, or whether there might be some kind of cooperation in the future. Well, this is basically what I wanted. These were my questions and the things which I found useful for maybe further discussion. But I know now we are running out of time, so I just stop it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wieland Wagner. You gave us a lot of questions, but because of the time constraint, we have to end the first section here. And the questions that we have received from the first section, we're going to have a group discussion at the very end of this international symposium. So we will hear the answer from that session. We will begin at 7:50 sharp. So we will resume at 7:50.